Hello, and welcome to American Amnesia. I am your host, Cliff Garner. And anyway, I'd like to make a shout out to my buddy Stephen Lynch. And have you noticed that I have this off? I wanted to keep you from freaking. So there you go, buddy. Here's to you. So at any rate, I got a whole bunch of books again. I went to the store and picked up a couple. And I actually have read some and moved on with some others. Right now I'm kind of thumbing through this one. It's Karen Armstrong, A Short History of Myth. Not familiar with her. Really not real big on a lot of what I read on myth. I don't really subscribe to that whole comparative mythology kind of thing where they kind of try to make equivalences and stuff like that. I don't think that that it is valid to consider Odin to be Mercury, for example. This is what the classical world tended to do. And I don't find it valid. I have real problems with it. So, at any rate, I do have problems with that. I also have problems with the notion of progress. Change is change, and we can debate about evolutionary change or radical change, and I think that those are both valid processes in change and in development of things, but I have no particular dogma on that. And progress, and that notion of progress that has hung on to Western thinking for a couple hundred years now, I think is not only invalid but pernicious. Progress indicates that you're not only changing what direction you're going into, or maybe going into the same direction, continually building and building and building and building. But the implication is that somehow it's getting better. I don't think that's necessarily the case, even if we were talking about technological advancement. I don't even think that's necessarily a positive thing in all cases. So I do have these problems with that, and that's part of what comes out in her book. However, there are some things in there that I kind of find interesting. I don't, I consider the source, and there's a couple gems in here. But the idea of myth, myth is not necessarily Myth is not necessarily a literal event. Rather, it is a larger than life in some way story that has greater depth than at first glance. There may be some kind of analogical or anagogical kind of value that doesn't come from the literal story, and that these myths, some myths are probably true, and as a Christian, I do believe that, and therefore, I do believe that the Christian doctrine is a myth that came true in history. That is one of the essential points of Christianity, is that it is historical, and this is true also of Judaism. To what extent in Islam we can argue? I think that there's a case to be made, both historical and anti-historical sorts of things going on in it, and that perhaps at certain levels, certain of the hadith are more mythic in as much as they become a legal literalism So that we could make all kinds of disputes on there, but myth is an important function of society, and she does note that we have a problem, kind of a crisis of myth, because we're kind of discounting it as an important force, and I happen to agree with that. So there, like I say, there's some gems in here, and this is I haven't gotten too far yet, but it won't last too long. I'll be through with that one pretty quickly. Today I picked up this book. In fact, I even still have a sticker on it. The Measure of Reality. And I also just recently picked up from Barnes & Noble a book called Infinitesimal, and it's dealing with measurement also. And these both are they talk about how measurement and mathematics in particular have developed actually in the this one's from 1250 to 1600, and it's very specific about that, and it talks about music and other mathematical concepts, painting and all that. Very, very interesting conceptually. Infinitesimal, which I don't even know where I put it. I think I've already misplaced it. But it deals mostly with the mathematics that went into Newtonian physics, and Newton is kind of the crowning achievement there. And it looks good. It's just that I don't know where I put it. I also picked this up, Life in Medieval Times. I do like books on this kind of thing. I also picked up one on everyday life in the Bible. It's Bible Times, rather. And that one's in the other room. But this is for the medievals. And I have several books on different everyday life or life in blah, 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 whatever. This here is Suetonius, the classical Latin writer who wrote about the lives of the Caesars. That is here. And also some of his other works are in here as well. Some really brief stuff. In fact, I think that's all that exists of his writing actually is in here on grammarians and stuff. And it looked like a pretty good version of it, so I picked it up. I think, in fact, I know I've read that before. I may have another copy of it someplace. I picked up this, also Center for Holy Land Study. The reason I picked it up is it has some mapping and diagrams of some of the archaeological stuff in Israel, and also some of the state of archaeology there and stuff like that. And it's not too old, I don't think. It had a couple of diagrams I was really interested in on Temple Mount, things of that sort. Yeah, 2014. So it's fairly contemporary. Now here's a few others that they'll probably circle in and out of my vision here. Now this one here, The Russian Revolution by Leon Trotsky. I read this many years ago, and I may pick it up, just kind of thumb through it a little bit here and there. Just for the sake of it. One of the classics I do periodically just grab a good book of literature and sit down and kind of go right through it. The T.H. White's Once and Future King. Great stuff. Haven't read it in years. and one of my favorites. I've always liked. Well, I'm really big on Arthurian fiction. Here's something I picked up not too long ago, a couple weeks ago. Keeper of Concentration Camps, and Dylan S. Meyer and American Racism. And this deals with the relocation of the Japanese Americans and things of that sort. That's what you actually see on the cover. But it deals with that, and the not just the Japanese, but also the Italians and Germans, and also some Native Americans and stuff, things of that type. There's a lot of different things in here, but it deals with this Dylan S. Meyer, and apparently he is kind of a focal point in a lot of this. I'm not familiar with him, so I do plan to take a look through this, see what I can find in there. One of the kind of things that every once in a while I'll see something and snag it up, and this is Nicholas V. Ryasanovsky, The Image of Peter the Great in Russian History and Thought. And when we talk about historical characters and stuff, very often they take on a symbolic quality, and that I find very interesting. And this is within the society in Russia there, and how Peter the Great has been an image viewed through various lenses. I know that in different points of time in the communist era, he was in and out of favor, and depending on how they wanted to use his imagery. And so this sort of concept actually holds a lot of interest to me to begin with, but with the mimesis that's been kind of highlighted of recently, I think what you have with symbols is a kind of a sliding scale as to how they're being appropriated and used, and how the meaning of them is malleable, and that this concept I find rather fascinating myself. I truly do. Here's one. I bought it a little while back at a Christian bookstore, and I just kind of put it off the side, and I came across it again, but it's something I've been meaning to read. And this is Answering Jihad, A Better Way Forward by Nabil Qureshi. I like Qureshi a lot. He was a Muslim convert to Christianity, and he's actually an excellent debater. And his ideas I rather find interesting. So I picked this up a little while back. And I have been meaning to pick it up and pull it out, and now I have. So there you go. I'll probably end up actually going cover to cover with this. Another one I came across also was a history of ISIS written by what's his name? The ACJL lawyer. What is his name? I can't think of it now. But he, I've read a lot of his articles, and he's also a very strongly activist lawyer, both as a Christian activist and as a actually a conservative activist. He has been trying to get certain things that have been bound up on Hillary Clinton and ex-President Obama that they've been dragging their feet on, and now that they're gone, it's actually moving on the what is that, the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. I mentioned this one before, and I pulled it back out so that I'll get to it a little bit more. And this is the end of traditional religions and the rise of Christianity. And this deals with that sweet spot right there, from the dawn of Christianity to pretty much the end of classical paganism. And it talks about how different society really was. I'm about half done with this, and it's actually quite good. The writer is trying to dust off the whole view of the society, I suppose. We really don't understand the classical era except through the lens that we use today. And even the neo-pagan ideas have been really filtered through by Christianity. I've talked to a lot of my neo-pagan friends about this, and the fact is that even as paganism was dying there, one of the things that happened is that a lot of the virtues of Christianity had melded onto the classical virtues of piety and of patriotism and of just all the different civic virtues, and that really in part that what had happened is that this transference of value made it to the point where by the time Julian the Apostate came in, that he, in order to try to rival Christianity, he was also creating his own church, as it were, and he was going into a very complex theology to try to combat Christianity, and furthermore, that in order to promote the pagan values, he almost had to get rid of the values themselves in the process. So there's been this glomming that has occurred, and really it permeates Western society and thought. And it's really interesting. I mean, I have my own opinions on all of that, but at the same time, this process was definitely in play at the time. Another one that I have, and I bought not too long ago, is this one here, Romans and Barbarians, the Decline of the Western Empire. This is another topic that I just find extremely fascinating, and the way the Germans in particular, but there were others. It's really kind of strange to think of the Alans as being Iranian, and they ended up all the way in Spain, and then them and the Vandals and a couple other Germanic tribes ended up going into North Africa. It's just amazing to think about. Just wow, big wow. But at any rate, this is. I have another book with the same title, and it's a little. I don't know. I think it might even be newer than this one. This one's written in 82. Yeah, actually, it's probably a little newer. I think it's like early 90s. But I can't find it. But this one here, I could find, and I found it at the bookstore not too long ago, and I do intend to go through it, give it a nice read. And I picked up this today. Frederick Douglass. It's a used book. I bought it over at Goodwill. My Bondage and My Freedom. And I read that a long time ago. And so this is a kind of a refresher. But I do like Douglass. He was a very interesting character. And very inspiring, actually. I think that he was one of the most remarkable men in our history, and I think that that's easy to demonstrate. Another one I got today was this, and this is also from Goodwill, the Underground Railroad from Slavery to Freedom, and I've got a couple other books on this, but this one's an older book, and by William Siebert. It says it's a comprehensive history. Probably is. Originally published 1898. So there you go. But it's something that has always been a fascination of mine. Living in Jacksonville, the Underground Railroad went through one of the best neighborhoods of town. And one of the older neighborhoods, right there on, I think it's State Street. And that there were some of the houses that had the actual track was in there. There was even pieces of track underneath of the monument in the center of town in Jacksonville, Illinois. And that was Douglass's hometown, really. Lincoln was more over here, Springfield and Petersburg area. And Douglass was more Jacksonville. And the two of them fought, debated very hard. But the Underground Railroad went right through Jacksonville, Illinois. It was amazing, actually. They removed a part of the monument there, one of the plates on there, and you could see down into the underneath of the city, and there it was, the Underground Railroad track, an actual track. And this is one that I find interesting. Armies of Pestilence, talking about disease and warfare and how it infected history. I got a couple books that deal with this, particularly in terms of the Mongol invasions on Europe, and that this one I think was a bestseller, actually, a little while back, not too long ago. But I saw that and I had to have it, and I bought this one about a week ago, 2 weeks, something like that, 96. Yeah, 96. So at any rate, just really a kind of quick hit on the left. I used to be a leftist myself. In fact, I was a socialist at a rather young age. I read Marx and Kautsky and what is his name? The American guys. Oh goodness, I can't think now. But I read a lot of these things. Well, Keynes. I read some of Keynes' work when I was younger, and I, like most young people, was rather smitten and bitten by the bug with the idealism. And socialism is really good at appealing to that, although it is it bad economics? Yeah, because what you're doing is you're taking everything. You're taking the bulk of the money and power and everything else, and you're putting it in a big heap in the middle, and you're trusting that whoever is doling it out is going to be honest. I mean, that's really well, it's probably asking too much for people. I mean, we're not angels, and the temptation for abuses is very high. And if you're dealing with an established bureaucracy like you do with the U.S., the temptation by the bureaucracy to waste the money and fritter it away is very high. I've heard people describe this as being the real trickle-down economics, and I have problems with the ideas of Reaganomics too. But the thing is that the trickle down from the bureaucrats is probably even less. They tend to soak it all up and pretty much fritter it away. The nature of bureaucracies does that. And when I was still young, I debated with what was his name? Oh goodness, my brain sometimes. Paul Finley, who was our representative in Jacksonville area. And I debated him on a hookup that we had in our class on contemporary affairs. I debated with him on socialism, and the thing is that at that age, what you're seeing is a little bit different than what the people in power see, and the fact is that socialism doesn't work because people aren't angels. Very simply, can it work? Well, yeah, sure, of course it can. You're moving money from one place to another, and one person to another, and the fairness of that is always a question. Even with the need of the other person involved. That's receiving it, that is there is a moral issue here, especially if you're appropriating it by force, which is generally how it's done. When you have the force of the state behind appropriating somebody's goods and giving them to somebody else, that is a pretty serious kind of thing to do. However, I've always rather liked the welfare state as a humane kind of thing. I think most of us agree that there should be sort of a safety net for the poor and the disadvantaged. And those that fall upon in bad circumstances. I think I think that's only right, and I don't disagree with that. But by the same token, the idea of massive reappropriation and redistribution of wealth, I don't think is good. I think it's better to permit the economic situation to adjust itself to where you have really smaller businesses as opposed to these large conglomerates that tend to be out of control anyway. The thing there is that you would have a more even distribution of wealth, and the difference between the employer and the employee would be reduced, that would be a little more equitable. So I do think that capitalism, if you have a fair playing field, tends towards actually a better distribution. And there's things that law can do. There's a reason why you do have a government, and it's to keep really prevent you from having these monopolies, these huge conglomerates that concentrate power and wealth in places and dictate to everybody else. There should never be the situation too big to fail. These banks, in any other business, should never be into the position where that they can pull down the whole edifice of our republic. That should not happen. And bringing back Glass-Steagall, I think, is very key. This is something I agree with the Bernie folks with. Bring back Glass-Steagall. Break these banks up. There's no reason they should be in this situation where that they can just hold our whole country hostage. And Obama didn't do it, and he infuriated me when he didn't. I went into research to keep from just coming down on him. I went into research on a lot of stuff on these derivatives and everything else, and I think that as far as it goes, let's get rid of those. There are reasons why there's some. I mean, futures are one thing. That's fine, because there's some businesses where you have to be able to kind of wager a future product against today's situation in order to make loans and stuff like that. But as far as the derivatives where they were bundling those home mortgages together, there is no excuse for that kind of thing, and that should never happen again. And that was one of my big problems with this whole whoop-de-doo about global warming. It really doesn't bother me one way or the other on whether or not there's warming. But what significance that takes is another issue. And giving a bunch of money to carbon derivatives, I mean, what kind of idiocy is this? Those are derivatives, folks. No. Let's not even go there. The abuse is too high, and it's too obvious. I mean, no. And not only that, giving a total break to China for just continually destroying the any good that any kind of a carbon tax would have mitigated. That any problems that would have mitigated, that would be foolish. I mean, because it's destroying more than the benefit would come from it. So that kind of thinking has to go away. This whole symbolic nonsense, it's like, well, this is raising people's awareness. No, it's not. We're aware. We've been aware of it. And the thing is that people won't admit it, or won't even deal with it, because there's all this political bullshit that's attached to it. Don't connect all these other things on there. This other baggage really ruins the whole situation. It takes away the clarity of what's going on. And not only that, now it becomes us against them. And you know something? I'm against you. If that's what you want to do, I'm against it. And for good reason. Because it doesn't accomplish anything. And it's not going to clean the environment. That I am worried about. And let's deal with the real situation instead of all this nonsense. And that's the thing about the left. The left has gotten into some symbolic victories and SJW nonsense and all this PC correct language and virtue signaling. I a long time ago, and we're talking the 80s, I quit that game of where you have to be lefter than thou. That is total lunacy. I went from being basically a good democratic socialist to becoming a full-fledged anarchist. And yeah, I wanted a revolution. And I surely wasn't going to play in the hands of these idiots like these guys do now. I mean, the people like Soros, they can go pound sand. And that's what they should be telling them. But they're not doing it. They're taking their money. Well, what happens if you take somebody's money? And Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin warned us back in the 60s that was what was going on. There were rich people who had a real interest in what was going on the streets. And they started bringing their money in then. And you wonder why Abby Hoffman blew his brains out. Or whatever he did. I don't remember. But he was so depressed I'm very sure it was a condition of the left. The left was falling apart back then. And it was almost totally in the hands of the Democratic Party. What kind of lunacy? What kind of lunacy? It wasn't supposed to be electoral politics anyway. There's a point where you have to come back and say, look, the two-party system is a fiasco. And whatever maintains that is wrong. I'd rather see them broken up. I always have. I've always been against the two-party system. I'm not changing today. So, where's the left now? Well, it's dissipating. It's falling apart. It's turning on itself, and they're eating their own young. Please. I'm tired of watching y'all. Really am. You know, get your stuff together. You know, this hysteria. You don't even know change when you see it. Wake up. Until next time.